afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Fiona Wills and I'm the UW Assistant Vice President for Innovation Development at Commotion. I know many of you, but I'm looking forward to meeting you also, the ones I haven't met yet, this afternoon after the talk. Today is the first talk in our series, Fundamentals for Technology Commercialization. It's being produced by our Innovation Training Group at Commotion. And today's talk is focusing on what the paths are to get your UW research ready for commercialization. We're going to be talking about 4 different paths for your research to have impact today. Whether you end up having your work be directly licensed into an existing company, whether there is a new startup formed in order to take it forward, whether there's direct licensing out of the University of Washington, or whether you decide to just release it free into the community. And we want to share with you some understanding of how each of those paths work. After the talk, we want you to join us for a networking time. There's going to be some food and some drinks, and we want to get to know you all better. And we're looking forward to hearing how your research is going and how we can help you move it forward. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you the mission of Commotion, which is to be the innovation hub and to expand both the economic and societal impact of the work here in the UW community. Moving on, I'd like to introduce the person who deserves the lion's share of credit for putting this talk together today. Magali Eaton is our Assistant Director of Innovation Training.
Hello, welcome. Well, first of all, you probably have realized that I've had a little sign language to ask Fiona to move over here, and that's because we are being filmed. So you might have seen a bunch of camera equipment. We are being filmed because we are actually streaming this talk out to notably Bothell and Tacoma. So hi, Bothell and Tacoma, welcome. For those who couldn't join us. And we will also keep this recording that we have, and we will post it on the website afterwards if you ever need to come back to the talk or try to figure out more things about it. Another thing that's cool is welcome to Fluke Hall, which is one of our startup incubators. So if any of you end up forming a startup, you might end up in one of our incubators. We have 3 of them. This is the incubator that specializes in engineering and life sciences. We have another one just southwest of campus that specializes in IT, software, and financial technologies. And we have a 3rd one that is at headquarters, which is by I-5, or closer to I-5, which specializes in augmented reality, virtual reality, and emerging technologies. So we have that as part of us. You will have found on your chair probably a commercialization manual. This commercialization manual does 2 things. One, it actually summarizes what you will hear today, and so if you're more of a visual person, you will have that, and I hope you can have that as kind of your encyclopedia for what you heard today. It also gives you the time for the next talk, which is going to be in September, and which is going to be focusing on intellectual property and the role of intellectual property if you ever decide to commercialize, what strategically that plays into that. You have heard from Fiona that there is 2 parts to this talk. The first part is going to be really giving you information about things. I actually am on the wrong slide. So there we go. So the first part really will give you the substance and the information. The second part, I hope you can stay with us for it, because we have with us a number of the people that are on the Commotion team that would be the people that walk you through this whole path. And so they're a tremendous amount of knowledge that I hope you can just use and use this opportunity to talk to them. The other people that we have, and it's really a privilege to have them here, is we have a few startups that are actually going to be here. So if you want to talk to people that were in your shoes a little while ago, they're going to be here, and you can ask them some questions. And we also have somebody here who chose to license directly out of UW, and so who kept the innovation inside UW and operates the program out of the University of Washington. The speaker today is going to be Ken Meyer. And you have probably seen his bio in the invitation, so I'm not going to spend time with his bio. He is one of our instructors. He is an advisor to our teams who want to commercialize. Without further ado, I will give him the microphone for his talk so you can actually hear the substance.
Thanks. I'm just going to grab that. Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. Welcome. And welcome to those of you out in the cybersphere. We're here for you. And I'm here as a commercialization advisor, part of the CoMotion team. As Magali mentioned, there are a number of folks here from the CoMotion team, and they're the experts. During this conversation that we're going to have, I'm happy to answer questions that you might have that are quick, but if I don't have the expertise or it is really a very specific and longer question, I'll defer to the folks who are the experts from the licensing and commercialization side of CoMotion. So, first quick question, how many of you are faculty members here? Excellent. How many of you are staff members? And then how many of you are students? Okay, so something about 70, 30, 10, okay? There is all of what we're going to be talking, a good portion of what we're going to be talking about will be applying to the faculty and staff. Some of it may be applying differently to the students, and again, the commercialization advisors at CoMotion can answer those questions. So what am I here to do? I'm here to help you understand at a high level the options that you have to commercialize innovations that you might be developing in labs, or might be developing in your mind, might be something that you are working on inside the role that you have as a staff member at the University of Washington. You've developed some new software program and you're wondering to yourself, hey, is there actually a market for this? And so the subject we're going to talk about is why might you want to commercialize? What are the classic pathways by which innovations reach the market? What are some implications you want to think about when you're making the decision about which of these pathways might make the most sense for your innovation? What might be considered critical success factors for each pathway? What do you have to do well if you want to be successful in each of those pathways? And then, of course, there's money always involved in whatever you're doing. And so we'll talk a little bit about money, about sources for it, and ways you need to perhaps think about it based on the pathway you're considering. And then what might be some next steps? How might you engage with a CoMotion team to get some advice or to get some resources? Okay, so first, some definitions of terms. You might hear some of these terms when you talk to the folks at CoMotion, or you might have heard them bandied about while here at the University of Washington. So first, commercialization. Commercialization is the process from taking innovations, technologies from the lab all the way to the market. So it's the high-level label given to this process of moving an innovation from a lab out into the world. Intellectual property. There are a variety of kinds of intellectual property. These are creative inventions of the mind, you might say, and they take various forms. They might be actually some technical composition, a new material, a new process. These are generally substantiated into the world in some form, a medical device, and so forth. And these can be, depending upon the innovation, protected by patents. There are also intellectual property that might be literary or artistic. These are compositions of work that you might write, an article, a book, artistic work. Software code generally is considered copyright. The opportunity there is to potentially copyright protect your intellectual property. So, and then the final form is what might be called designs, symbols, imagery, logos, those kinds of things. And if you seek to protect those are usually trademarked. So intellectual property takes various forms. There are various reasons why you would want to or can protect them, and there are various forms, should you want to and can protect them, to actually do that. Generally, patents, copyrights, or trademarks. These give the inventor the ability to have some rights to it with potential for benefit, remuneration, or otherwise, and a certain freedom to commercialize for a period of time. Public disclosure. Public disclosure is if you as an inventor make any non-confidential statement to the public, and that could include your family or your friends, about your invention and its details. And this is important, particularly if you want to, or if the University of Washington wants to protect it. So if you have a great idea you're ruminating on, and you're about to go to a conference to talk about it, you might want to pause and ask yourself, do I want to make public disclosure, or do I want to first go to the University of Washington CoMotion office and make a record of that innovation? And that simply is a form that you fill out to disclose this innovation to the CoMotion team and to the University of Washington, because if you do eventually want to protect it, you want to make sure that it's registered, that you came up with that idea and you let the UW team know about it. So that's what a record of invention is. And then you have a startup. We all know what a startup is. My favorite definition is by a guy named Steve Blank, which is a temporary organization in search of a repeatable business model. I like to add a repeatable, profitable business model. Essentially, a startup is a new company that hopes to be successful in the world. And the way that he describes it is it's a temporary organization in search of some repeatable business model that can make money, right? And then a license, right? A license involves the rights given by a licensor, in this case, oftentimes the University of Washington, to a licensee, which could be an existing company or a new company, to use that intellectual property in exchange for some consideration, some remuneration or some other form, right? So these are some terms that you might hear, and they're just good to keep in mind as we walk through this. Okay, so why the heck would you want to commercialize your technology or your invention? And I think it's important to just pause on this for just a moment, and that is, when you come up with an idea, it's oftentimes in the form of a technology. It may not be in the form of a product or service that someone will buy. And so part of the path, as you think about this path from lab to market, is that you have an idea, you have maybe a bench-proven concept, you have the formation of something early. It is going to go through a lot of stages before it reaches the form where it is a product or service that someone is going to buy and compensate you for. The UW CoMotion team is there to help you understand that process and to provide the resources along the way to help you work through that. There are intellectual resources, advice and counsel. There are courses. There's funding available. And so this is a journey that you go on, and you have a number of options on which journey you want to take. But why would you do this? One is that you can have a significant societal impact based on the work that you're doing in your lab or the discovery that you've made as a staff member or student. So you can change the life of a large number of folks and have a significant societal impact if you take what you're doing and bring it out into the world. This is an opportunity to grow professionally. The process of commercialization, whichever path you take, will put you into connections with oftentimes industries, representatives, outside parties and suppliers, other manufacturers, a whole world of individuals that might further your knowledge of your domain, potentially help fund the work that you do. And so there's a significant professional growth that you will be eligible for if you invest in doing this commercialization. It's also very personally rewarding and challenging. The world of commercialization is risky inherently, not surprisingly, requires a lot of experimentation, something that you are all very well skilled at doing, oftentimes, and I would argue better at doing than folks who come from the outside world who are not scholars and researchers by training. So there are gaps in your knowledge, not surprisingly, that you'll be able to fill and learn and grow personally. It also provides an opportunity for your own team, your postdocs, your students to grow, whether it's working on this with you while you're at the university, or if at some point they end up choosing to join the company if it should be spun out into a new company. And then, of course, there's always this question about, is there money in this? And there is money in it. There's possibilities for financial gain. Again, these are high-risk efforts. And so I would say that you should ask yourself if that's really what you're motivated by, because you're certain to get many of the other elements on this list. It's not guaranteed you're going to get financial gain, right? You should know that. There's opportunity. And what you do see is there are often a few home runs and a number of base hits, if we could use a baseball analogy, and a number of strikeouts, right? That's just the nature of this work. And then finally, this certainly can help enhance your personal CV, as well as the CV of the University of Washington. We are known as one of the most innovative universities in North America, in the world, and one of the reasons for that reputation is because of the licensing and spin-outs that are done from this institution. So these are some reasons why you might want to even do this. So how are you going to do this? You have some choices, and in consultation with the Commotion team, they can help you evaluate these different options that you might want to take. So one option is you essentially, the UW on your behalf and UW's behalf, license this innovation to an existing company. Another is that it licenses it to a new startup that has been created especially for this purpose of taking this innovation to market. So in the first example, it's an established company who sees the value in taking this technology and licenses it. In this one, you're actually creating a startup to bring it to the market. The third is that you build what might be called an internal business at the University of Washington, which means it isn't a UW business that serves a commercial audience, a commercial or nonprofit audience. And then the fourth is essentially open distribution. You make it generally available to the world, okay? So you really have four fundamental paths: license to an existing company, start up a company for this purpose, create an internal business, and open distribution. And so what we'll do from here now is take each of these four paths and look at them a bit from different angles, right? You know, why would you choose each path? And because each has implications in terms of energy, risk, and so forth. So licensing to an existing company at a highest level, why would you do this? Well, one of the reasons is it often offers the best path to reach the market and be successful because the licensee generally, or wouldn't license it, has presence, knowledge in the market for your innovation. So you might be a solution they've been looking for to add to their existing product, to add value to that product, and they have a distribution channel and they have a market brand, and they can bring that out to the market. It could be that you offer an extension to one of their products where you're actually taking them to a new place that they've wanted to go. You could be solving a problem for them that they've been unable to solve themselves. You could solve a problem they've been working on but get there faster than they do, right? Because it's taking them too long. So it often offers the quickest way given the expertise of the licensee, right? And the other reason you might approach this is that the innovation you may have may not be substantial enough to stand alone as a company. We were working, for example, with a a researcher at the UW Medicine who had an application that he had developed that sat on top of an anesthesia machine to alert the anesthesiologist to a variety of information. It was determined that there just wasn't a standalone business for that kind of software. There was, however, major players who produced anesthesia machines who were quite interested in talking to us, right? So a second reason why it might not be a fit is it's just not substantial enough. It's a feature, or if it's a narrow application that probably wouldn't warrant a standalone business. So that's the license to an existing company. As an example, Ubiquity was a team represented from the technology at both Western Washington and UW that licensed, the team here licensed their technology to the company called Ubiquity, which was interested in their solar concentration technology. So established company in this domain, saw the innovation, said we would really like to get our hands on that, and licensed it, okay? And if you would like to talk about that, Forrest, hand raised, is the technology licensing manager who handled that. So that's the first one. Second one is you start up a new company. You actually take this innovation and you launch a company with this innovation. So why would you approach it, take this path? Well, one may be that there is a large, hopefully growing market for the solution that you have invented that you believe you can address with a standalone company and actually make money, right? So there's a large opportunity, it's growing, and you have done some preliminary work that gives you confidence. Perhaps you've gotten some initial customers, which there are vehicles for doing that while still at the University of Washington, that demonstrate people will pay a premium for this, and I believe that the cost structure to create this business is reasonable. The second is that you say to yourself, I have confidence in the team that is going to run this startup and take this out to market. Because as you can imagine, it's all about the team when it comes to launching a new business, because you are needing people who are very flexible in terms of adapting to what the market is telling them. This is a team of skills that has the ability to tell a story that will raise potentially money that's needed. They are individuals who are like Swiss Army knives. They have a single blade of expertise in one area, but at the same time they're able to do many things. And so you say to yourself, I see a large market, I see it's growing, I think we can make money, I like this team that we can bring together, or someone is bringing together. And you say to yourself, I don't see somebody else who's interested in licensing this. So at a high level, when you look at the two kind of license to an existing, spin out your own company, those are the things you probably want to ask yourself. And then an example of a company that was formed from UW Technology is Visus. You might have heard about them. And this is one of the leading edge helmet manufacturers for professional and collegiate and K-12 sports, given head trauma. This is already, they've got 50 employees and is doing quite well. And we have a technology licensing manager right here. Can you raise your hand if you don't mind? Who handled that license. So this is a spin-out created. It was the team came together at the lab. They worked on it here. Then a new company was formed, and a professional CEO was hired to put the team together and run it. And I honestly don't know whether any of the team members here are even part of the company. Most, I think the researchers are still at the University of Washington. So that's the second option. So we've had a number of successful acquisitions of these startups. Turi was purchased out of computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning was acquired by Apple. CSATs, which did, for lack of a better word, crowdsourcing of health professionals doing procedures as a way of evaluating their performance for certification, was purchased by Johnson & Johnson. And Universal Cells, a biotech startup, was purchased by Astellas. These are just examples. 25 startups have been purchased from the University of Washington in the last number of years. And so one of the exit possibilities for the startups is obviously to be acquired by a larger company. Okay, third option, build an internal UW business. So this is where you want to stay here. You believe there's a market opportunity for your innovation, and this fits with your research activity of the lab, and it benefits your research. And the reputation of the UW would be enhanced by you forming this internal UW business, but it's not for the faint of heart, or it takes quite a bit of a commitment. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But generally speaking, this is where you have an innovation which perhaps has a social purpose, or which you do not want to commercialize generally to the market through a startup or to a licensing, but is aligned very well with your research, right? But again, it takes quite a bit of commitment. The example here is drug interaction solutions. This has been around for a number of years. Produces quite a bit of revenue, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially what they have done is have cataloged and tracked the interactions of drugs. And healthcare providers and institutions contract on a subscription basis to understand what's the current drug interaction dynamics. And so so they're basically mapping and keeping a catalog of drug interactions. That's a UW business that's here, but it serves an outside constituency. Okay, that's an example. And then the final one is you distribute for free your innovation. And this would be if you don't think that there's financial gain that's likely through any other path, and you believe that it's really important to get this out quickly in order to have the societal impact or market impact that you want. But essentially, you're distributing this for free. So those are the four options. Generally speaking, why you would want to pick one versus the other. Everything is nuanced. Everything is unique to the context that you're working on, and that's what the CoMotion team is to help you kind of wrangle with and think through. But that's a high-level kind of way of parsing which one might make sense. Now, an example of the distribute for free is the One Bus Away. I don't know if you've used this app. That's a UW innovation and was just distributed out into the market for free. Okay, so what's the implications of these? So the way we're thinking about this is, we'll go through this fairly quickly, but there's different commitments that are going to be needed from you on each of these choices, these four pathways. There's a different type of financial return you might get. There's a different degree of control you'll have over this venture. There's different degrees to which you could actually pull this off and still stay at the UW. And there's relative risks, although we need to be clear, they're all quite high risk, no matter which. So let's go through these quickly so you can kind of see, as you look at these options, how might you assess what you have or something that you've discovered. So commitment from you varies, not surprisingly. This is very high-level way of thinking about the commitment based on each of these options. If you license to an existing company, generally the commitment up front from you is high, and then it tapers off relatively quickly, not surprisingly, because they have taken this license and said, thank you. They may perhaps want to fund some research from you. They may want to contract with you to provide some guidance on an ongoing basis. Hard to know, but they may say thank you very much. The effort on the front end involves a few things. One, being able to have a narrative, a story that is persuasive to a potential licensee, which means working with a CoMotion team and other resources they might be able to help connect you with on the business research side to say who out there are companies who see this as a pain point that I'm solving for them or an opportunity that I'm helping them realize, Who might they be? What is that pain point? What's that opportunity? And what's the story I can tell? So telling an effective story, a story that has them believe there's a return on the investment of going through the whole process of licensing. And you might need to mock up some. It will depend on the licensee as to how far along in the commercialization of a product they will want you to be in order to be interested. And so that might vary. But generally, high up front, sloping down. Then you have a startup spin-out. Well, that depends whether you're the CEO or CTO of the organization, meaning you are going to join this entity, in which case it's a huge commitment for an extended period of time, or if you're going to be an advisor, which might be heavy up front, depending upon what you and this startup team come to agree with, and may taper over time, right? You might be on their customer, their kind of technical advisory committee, right? Which could be very light work, light duty for you all, right? But if you join the company, not surprisingly, that's a heavy load. UW internal business we would call moderate, but sustained. And we'll go through a little bit about what that means. And then open distribution, you have to do a lot of work up front, and you have to think about what, if any, kind of support you intend to give, which presumably is not a lot or at your leisure or at your discretion. But you're going to have to prepare it to get it out, and then things should taper off, relatively speaking, versus the other options. So in terms of commitment level, you can see that licensing to an existing company, open distribution, have a moderate amount up front, tapering off, while internal business or startup take more energy and commitment from you, the latter depending upon what role you play. This is Dr. Greg Newblom, who is the founder and CTO of Membryon, which has received venture funding just in this last year. He said, we spend years training to do science and engineering. The real challenge is figuring out the product development and scale up amidst the complexity of picking the right market entry strategy, building the right team, marketing, raising capital, customer service, and uncertain finances. It's the most difficult and rewarding jigsaw puzzle you can try to piece together. So it can be extremely rewarding, very interesting work to do this. But this is the startup option, right? Okay. Degree of control on these options, right? On the left is low degree of control. On the right is relatively higher degree of control, meaning your degree of control about what's going to happen here on this innovation that you have. When you do open distribution, not surprisingly, you're letting it out, so you have fairly little control over what happens once you let it out. As you move up and you say you license to an existing company, again, low control. They are going to determine what to do with that technology as long as it's within the terms of the license that have been negotiated, and you're generally going to let go. Depending upon the role that you have in a startup, you can have some to significant control. If you're an advisor, you are just that. If you're the CEO, you have a significant amount of control. Just remember that you're likely going to need investors, and they're going to have some significant control over your life as well. And then you would have, not surprisingly, a high degree of control if it was your own internal business. So that's the degree of control comparison. And then your ability to do this while you're UW varies. You can absolutely do this while licensed to an existing company while you're a UW employee, absolutely. You can do a startup, but it's very time-consuming, and you may need to leave or partial leave if you're a faculty member, and the department chair that you're in and the dean need to agree to this. And frequently, grad students or postdocs will take on roles at the company. But the spin-out, you really need to take a leave that's approved from the UW. A UW internal business you can do while you're here, but just be aware that it is time-consuming. It's a different type of management than being a PI managing a research team. And it may require use of some UW staff in your department, so you want to be ready for that. And then, of course, open distribution, you can do that. So both ends, absolutely. While at the UW, Definitely UW internal business, but there's some implications. And startup spin out, you'll need to take a leave, highly likely, unless you take an advisory role with the organization. Relative risks, I said they're all fairly risky. Well, if we look at risk from low to high, we can say that open distribution is probably the lowest, followed by a UW project, though there is some risk, which is you're going to, before royalties come back to the University of Washington for something that you're creating, a business inside, you've got to put up upfront costs, right? You've got to build this internal business, you've got to get product out there, you've got to hope somebody buys that, and then from that royalties come back. So there's some upfront commitment that you're betting on that the return will come. More risky, licensing to, the risk for success is medium, licensed to an existing company, highest for a spin out. Right? Any questions so far? I'm giving you a lot. Okay. So type of financial return on a UW project, direct licensing return to the UW and off into the lab. Same with licensing to an existing companies. The royalties are distributed back to UW and shared with the innovator. With startup spin-out, there is a license between the spin-out and the University of Washington, which CoMotion puts in place. And royalties from that and equity are distributed back to the UW, and a share of that goes to the innovators and departments, and some equities separately to the startup team. So that's the difference between those in terms of financial return. So no matter which path you take, here's a little acronym to remember, kind of what does it really take to make any of these successful? Let's use the word success, and the words are your support, your key. None of these paths will be successful without your involvement in an appropriate sort of way for you and for the success of the path. You have to be solving some unmet need that's substantial out in the world. We all believe that we are doing that when we create new innovations, but the market will tell you, and so you have to listen to the market, which is the C part, customer-driven. We have a vision of what we think the world wants. We have to let the market pull us, which means really doing a lot of customer development. We talk about product development, and we talk about customer development. Both of them have to go with each other. And generally, customer development should always be in front of product development. What tends to happen oftentimes is product development leads, and we build a hammer and look for a nail. What's more important, though, is to really have the customers pull you into the market, pull you into developing the solution that they want, iterating quickly on the most minimally version versus thinking you know what they want, building a comprehensive solution, taking it to the market and figuring out that it wasn't really what they were looking for. So this product development and customer development have to go hand in hand. C is cash. There needs to be some funding of this commercialization pathway. You're going to want expert advice, whether it be from the CoMotion team, from external advisors, or other, regardless of the pathway. You're going to want a solid team regardless of the pathway that you choose, and you need to be differentiated. You need to be bringing to the world something that's significantly advantaged. People forget that of all the options customers have, they have your option and they have competitors, right, to your option. But there's one that people forget about, and that is not doing anything. So you're competing against known competitors who are out there, or the customer doing nothing. Or maybe no competitors, but you still have this question about whether the customer wants to make the leap. So all of these things are important, and again, we can help you think through these elements. So we talked about some of the critical success factors. What really has to go well for each of these pathways to hopefully achieve the success you want? When it comes to licensing to an existing company, we talked a little bit about this. Demonstrating that you can convince them that you have a really compelling value that you can bring their company that either generates more revenue, keeps customers, solves a problem that they have, but there is a value proposition there. So learning what their problems are and their challenges are and customizing your narrative to them is important. The second is that you're able to negotiate a license. The Commotion office is able to negotiate a license, which is a win-win for both parties. And finally, it may involve some degree of onboarding of you to assist the licensee for it to be handed off in an effective sort of way. So, a compelling story, a license that meets a win-win, and your involvement to help make it happen and bring it across to the licensee. In terms of critical success for a startup, it really depends on what role you choose to take or not. If you choose to take a role, whether it be the CEO, an advisor, or chief technology officer, chief science officer, it's clarity with that team and competence at whatever role you choose to play, right? And in terms of that, let's talk a little bit about startups, and if you should want to maybe take a break and take a leave and do a CEO role. It's going to take 150% of your time. You will be challenged. You'll learn a lot. You'll need to build your business acumen, which I don't doubt you can't do. It does require a shift in mindset from being a PI, controlling all of the variables in your space, to being one in which you are leading a team of diverse individuals who are motivated for various reasons to be part of that startup team and who have other options. So motivation is really an important characteristic of effective startup leaders. Telling an effective story to potential fundraisers, right? And you're going to do a lot of storytelling, and being effective at that is going to be important. That's if you want to be a CEO. If you want to be an advisor, here you have lower time commitment, and understand that the business is taking this innovation and they're actually building a product around it that serves some customer need. And so it will likely be morphed over time. And the thing that you felt was the most important part of the innovation may end up being secondary to another aspect of this product or solution. So being flexible in your mindset regarding this baby that you have now had a startup take out is going to be important, right? And you're going to give up control and trust through advice to them that they're going to be able to be effective at commercializing this innovation. This is a quote from a founder and CEO who came out of the UW. Being a strong communicator and presenter has really helped me through this technology development, fundraising, partnership building, and social entrepreneurship journey. Communicating science and technical topics to the general public is a valuable skill to make meaningful progress and impacts in the real world. So one of the things you'll get extremely good at is taking your narrative, your scientific knowledge, and translating it and telling it into a really compelling story that moves an audience, that moves investors, and that means it's going to be, the nature of the story is going to be different. It's going to be, the technical capabilities and advantages are going to be secondary to the benefits that you're going to be communicating about how you're improving the lives of people or this business. So you'll be a storyteller. So what about building a UW business? There's some things that are going to be important. You need to have the resources to build and sustain this because, as I mentioned, licensing revenues will come after the fact. So you need to think that I need to get this up and running and going within my own budget or by funding sources, because whatever return I might get is going to come after that. Again, not surprisingly, it's really getting attuned to market needs and the customer problem you're solving, and serving that need, and that means you're going to need manpower, so staffing for this is going to be important. And then network, figuring out peers who might be early customers of this internal business and leveraging those relationships to get kick-started and get the fire burning. And building, spending some time of your own to go out and build a network with folks who could be potential customers. So there's resources, there's market needs, and there's the network to build a UW business. And then in terms of open distribution, there are some things you want to think about here. You need to be sensitive to the fact that if your solution, your innovation involves some third-party materials, you need to be cognizant of the fact of whether there's compensation that is expected for that, whether you have the right to distribute that intellectual property. So being sensitive to any third-party materials that are inside this innovation that you have. You need to make sure you understand if there's any, there's no other UW patented technology or protected IP that is part of your solution. Your team agrees to this approach. You want to make sure that they're involved in this decision and have a voice in it. And then you need to make sure you have a UW-approved open source license, which the CoMotion team has. So you see these 4 pathways, lots of variables to think about, right? I always find that it's good to start with what do you personally want to do? What would make you most fulfilled and achieve your professional goals and your personal goals first. And then you have to ask yourself, what does the market really want, need? How big is this problem I'm solving? Is somebody willing to pay for it? Is there really something out there that I'm going to solve? And then if you feel good about both those pieces, then it's, okay, well, how do I get there? What's the best way to get there? Because each of them, it has trade-offs. So you may need to get funding, not surprisingly. There are funding sources within the University of Washington and its partners. We have the Washington Research Foundation. The second one is actually customers. You can fund this thing off customers that you generate. That's called bootstrapping. You probably have heard that term, where you pick yourself up from your own bootstraps. There are some funding mechanisms at CoMotion, which I'll speak about in a minute. And then, of course, the federal government has funding sources in a number of forms, including things like SBIR and STTR grants. This is a picture which shows one of the valley of deaths. You may have heard this term. There's a term in the startup parlance where you get out into the world and you start your company up and you get your first few customers, and now you feel like you're ready to go start growing, but you need money to grow. And you may not have enough money or convinced an investor that you can, to get that money to get to the next level of your business. That's called kind of the valley of death. There's actually one beforehand, or a valley of sorrow beforehand, which is you've got this research-funded innovation, and you want to get it in a form that you can tell a story, demonstrate proof. And that is where CoMotion funding can help you, because their Innovation Gap Fund has provided over $1 million per year to UW researchers to help them move from lab to that next stage in the commercialization milestone. So it might be funding a minimally viable product, a very minimally viable prototype, for example, along with some market research to understand customer needs, right? And so there is a process, and you can go on the CoMotion website to learn more about the Innovation Gap Fund. Some great life sciences and information technology-oriented innovations just came through the last wave in the last couple weeks. And then there are funding sources outside the UW. You may have heard this term dilutive and non-dilutive. It's very simple. If you haven't, if you own a company and you have equity in the company, which means you own the company, there are some people who will give you money and you have to give a piece of the company up. That's called dilutive funding, right? When an investor gives you money, you're getting diluted because you're giving them a piece of the pie. When you get money and you don't have to give up any of the pie, that's called non-dilutive. And so on the left are non-dilutive, like the Washington Research Foundation, like the SBIR grants, and of course paying customers. And on the right are of course dilutive, family and friends, angel investors, professional investors, right? And the university has a very good track record of being of interest to professional investors, both these angel groups in Washington and in local and national venture capitalists. They've invested close to $6 billion in UW spinouts. And some of these are local investors, including Madrona and Voyager Capital. There's WRF. And so investors are interested in innovations that come out of the University of Washington. What's very interesting that I've personally found over the years is that the innovations that come out of this institution are exponential impacts on society. Many things that come out of the commercial world, somebody leaving Microsoft and starting their own company, not always the case, but oftentimes are incremental improvements. What you see out of the UW are world-changing kind of ideas. So if this interests you, that's what the UW team at Commotion team is to help you with. So next steps, if you have questions, ask for a consultation, meet with one of the innovation managers here, or request a meeting over at the Commotion office. And they are organized by areas of kind of technology domain or scientific domain. So they each have a background personally in these domains, so they are very technically competent, in addition to knowing all about the intellectual property and commercialization pathways. So these people are experts in their fields. So talk to them. The other, if you want to build your skills and continue this kind of knowledge building, is to come to one of our Fundamentals of Tech Commercialization trainings. They're great. They go deeper into some of these areas, whether it's about funding or about customer development, or thinking about the business you might want to create or who you might want to license to. And so we have some training sessions. If you've got something concrete in your mind and you haven't yet disclosed it, encourage you strongly to submit a record of innovation to make sure that you feel good that it's been recorded, right? And it's lodged. Finally, if you think you might want to do a startup, we're happy to talk to you about what that entails. And we have something called Fundamentals of Startups Friday. This is oriented both to an audience like this, as well as some of the many companies that are sitting in the incubators here to learn more about what it takes to grow a startup. So a quote from Howard Shizek, a UW scholar who also was involved with a startup called Blue Haptics. There are a lot of steps to go from first idea to viable company. Commotion has provided help along the entire path. In addition, the company founders found Commotion's educational programs to be quite valuable. So we hope you'll take advantage of this. Are there any questions before I turn this over back to Magali? I threw a lot at you. Yeah.
I have a question about the timing for the record of innovation.
Yes.
Because as academic researchers, we are always very eager to publish our work.
Yes.
So when should we file the innovation?
So the question for those who didn't hear it is, when do you file a record of innovation? Fiona, do you want to help answer that?
I would say that you should actually do a consultation request and start talking to the manager, your innovation manager. You'll get assigned one at that point, and then you can have that conversation. You do want to make sure that the evaluation is being done before the publication comes out, so it's important to start working before that point.
Before it comes out or before we submit?
Before it comes out, before it's actually published. It's okay to submit a publication. Now, generally, you want to start working with us before that because otherwise you're compressing your timeline of working with us. But I don't think you have to rush right to a record of innovation. Feel free to request a consultation. It's a lower barrier to starting to work with us. Okay.
Yes.
So, in terms of patenting, UW, like 10 years ago, you guys were very aggressive in getting things patented and taking things, and recently it seems like the answer is we're not going to spend the money for it, we're not going to do patenting, and that leaves kind of people in lurch. Is there an answer to what it is now?
So there's a question about what is our philosophy and approach to patenting?
Yep.
So you're correct that we had a situation starting almost 2 years ago where our patent budget was cut significantly. I can say that it is partially restored at this point, and so we are definitely in the patenting business. We are making decisions that are really based on both whether or not it's going to be strong intellectual property and whether there is that market pull for the innovation. So, we're very eager to work with you through that evaluation process, and if it's looking like your innovation is going to be successful or has the potential, then we will be supporting patenting.
Yes.
So I'm in the very early stages of a project, and one possibility for it to secure funding to develop a project is to actually work with a company that I would imagine, if this became a product, would be a licensee. Is working with that company a bad idea, a good idea? How do you go about that?
So you have an innovation that you're working on, and you have a company that might be interested in working with you and eventually could potentially be a licensee. That's a great thing to do. Strongly encourage it. What you want to do, however, is you want to make sure you have clear understanding between yourself and the company in terms of what you disclose. And if you do work with them, who owns that? So again, I would request a consultation and say, what do we need to put in place between you and that company to make sure that it's a good relationship and you can charge forward and actually increase the odds that you could get a license from them, so that they don't think at some point, oh no, that's ours now. So yeah, good thing. If you've got a customer on the line, customer development and product development, that's fantastic.
I just want to add that I agree. It's a great thing to do. Depending on the culture of the company, most companies will start asking you to sign something at the beginning of working together, and that's another important reason to be working with us before that happens.
Yeah.
You spoke mostly about commercialization, but you also mentioned sort of the nonprofit sector spinning off ideas in that way. Does Commotion support that in the same way it supports commercialization?
We do, and in fact,
Sorry, I'm going to repeat the question.
Okay.
For those. There was a question about whether Commotion supports nonprofit commercialization endeavors as well as for-profit commercialization.
And there's a few different layers to that. Sometimes there actually is a license of intellectual property in not-for-profits because the not-for-profit also would like to be able to benefit from that protection. We also have a number of projects where we help in a variety of ways to identify markets. Occasionally there's some gap funding that is committed to those projects. So we definitely actively encourage people to be talking to us. I mentioned at the beginning that part of our mission is the societal impact as well as the economic impact.
A repeat successful
Yes.
entrepreneur, yes.
That's why I'm asking this question. You had a graph that had a high effort for a license to an existing company. And my question is that usually expected? Because in my experience here, the license occurs after the grant has expired. There's no more funds for that project. And now you're saying the expectation is that we're going to put out a lot of effort initially once that license is inked.
So,
and then you said, and you can also do a development contract, but it sounded like the effort was expected at the time of license and no necessarily signing a development contract.
So the question that pertains to this chart that indicated there was a lot of upfront energy required of the researcher in a license scenario, and here's what I would say, and I'll let Fiona answer as well. You may or may not be approaching a potential licensee as part of an ongoing funded research effort. You may have an innovation where you think that somebody out there would like to license it. So it's going to take quite a bit of energy for you to figure out who would be that candidate set of companies, what's the narrative, and so forth. In terms of how much time it might take of yours, should you already have an existing funded relationship with that company, my expectation is it would likely be less since you have already been working with them. So I guess it depends.
The reason why I asked is because when the license was signed, the company had full expectation that we would work for free. Huh. And it took a long time to convince them, no, that's not really how we were expecting it. But your graph showed that.
I think the graph was intended to cover both that when you are disclosing to us, you're the scientific expert, we need a fair amount of your time working through that evaluation, intellectual property protection, identifying an appropriate licensee. You know that when we do licenses that there are elements of a license that we want to make sure fit with the goals that you would imagine for your project. We would expect that if a company wanted your time after a license, that they would be doing it through either a consultation agreement with you personally or through some sort of sponsored research agreement. But in most cases, if you can get involved in that technology transfer, they are more successful than when you throw something over a wall and just hope that people on the other side can reproduce the work that you had been doing without you adding the context for it. So we have not been signing you up for free consulting, Eric.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time and look forward to working with you all.
All right, this is just